Hello and welcome to India's World. Today we are going to discuss the Chinese proposal to revive a maritime silk route linking the Pacific and the Indian Oceans to boost regional connectivity and trade. The initiative was first proposed by the Chinese President Xi Jinping when he visited Southeast Asia in October last year. The same month, Prime Minister Li Keqiang also visited the region and announced the setting up of a maritime cooperation fund of $495 million, part of which would also support the plan for the new maritime silk route. This year the proposal seeks to include Sri Lanka, India and even the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. In the last round of Sino-Indian border talks, an invitation was extended to India to join the Maritime Silk Route initiative. India has accepted the invitation. To understand what the new Chinese initiative means, we have with us a very distinguished panel of experts on China. We have with us Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, a formidable diplomat. He was India's foreign secretary and ambassador to France and Russia. We have Ambassador Nalin Surie, without doubt one of our foremost experts on China. He was India's High Commissioner to UK and ambassador to China. And my old friend Dr. Jabin, he's a young expert on China. He's assistant director of Institute of Chinese Studies in Delhi and knows the region well and the country very well. I welcome all of you to this discussion. Ambassador Sibal, let me begin with you. How should one understand in India the Maritime Silk Route proposal? What are its diplomatic and economic contents?
Well, I am a bit puzzled as to what the Chinese are actually intending to propose. You mentioned just now some historical basis to this Maritime Silk Route. I am not aware of the historical basis, unless, of course, the Chinese want to go back to Zhangzi, 14th century, and try and revive that historical memory. But in the last 6 centuries, there is no maritime silk route as such. Yes, there has been a silk route on the land, on the continent. So first of all, it's not very clear to me what China has in mind. But of course, one can speculate what they might mean. It is because of the expansion of the Chinese Navy and the extension of China's reach, naval reach, maritime reach across the Indian Ocean to the African littoral. All that is causing concerns as to what this might mean in the context of rising power of China and its military strength. And they want to allay those suspicions and want to project the idea that this is being done in a cooperative framework, and therefore there is no reason for any of the participating countries to fear what China is intending to do. But this is just a ploy. I think one has to analyze it more deeply and understand what the Chinese diplomatic game is.
Okay, Ambassador Surie, this Maritime Silk Route obviously is a parallel to the Land Silk Route which moves westward from China, and then you have the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar trade corridor being proposed. What does this triple thrust on developing trade links mean?
I think you have to look at it in the context of the issues arising out of Deng Xiaoping's 4 modernizations. The crux of the 4 modernizations was go out, go global. I think this whole process is part of China's effort to enhance its connectivity, first internally and then externally. And you know, it's also part of the whole Chinese concept of the hub and spoke principle. China is the hub and there are several spokes. So you have the internal spokes in terms of connectivity, you have the land spokes, and now you have the maritime spokes. And as Ambassador Sibal said, the maritime spokes now become relevant not only because of the size of China's foreign trade, but also because now China has the wherewithal and the capacity to project its maritime power as distinct from just naval power.
Okay, Jabin, some Chinese scholars have said that the new Maritime Silk Route will bring tangible benefits to all the countries that are involved in it and will be the new driving force in the region, which it may very well be. My question to you is, what proportion of Chinese trade is maritime trade, and is the role of maritime trade likely to go up in their overall trade, and is that what is impelling them to propose the Maritime Silk Route?
See, first of all, this is not a new initiative. The maritime component of their trade has always been extremely significant. I mean, they have raw materials flowing towards China and trade commodities flowing the other way out of China. But the important thing to note here is, you know, if you were to just take the question of India in it, it's a hub and spoke arrangement certainly, but all the spokes also involve India, whether it is the Central Asian Silk Route, Northern Silk Route strategy, or the BCIM, the Bangladesh, China, India-Myanmar economic corridor.
But the northern route bypasses us, doesn't it? It
Yes,
goes to Gwadar
that's-
through.
But you see,
okay.
that's I'm coming to that. And the point is that how realistic corridor is the China-Pakistan
Yep.
corridor. In effect, if they are going to take it through Iran, they will still need Indian cooperation or Indian involvement in it. And the Maritime Silk Route. I mean, the Maritime Silk Route might be it's just another way of accessing India's eastern coast. And this has a historical precedent. This has always been part of how China did trade. It involved India's east, India's south. So it signifies an increasing reliance or understanding of the maritime aspect of China's rise. The next 20 years include, involve a great deal of reliance on the maritime dimension.
Sibal, how important is Indian Ocean for them? Because they've been trying to access Indian Ocean not only through this so-called Silk Route, but also through Myanmar, through Bangladesh. Considering that most of their energy supplies from West Asia and from Africa come through the Indian Ocean, do you think that is what is impelling them to sort of develop their navy, develop their merchant fleet, and get all countries on board in a cooperative framework?
Certainly, so far as development of their commercial fleet is concerned, what you said is absolutely right. In terms of the Navy, I think it will take them some time before they can come with any significant naval strength into the Indian Ocean. They first have to deal with the presence of the US Navy in the Western Pacific. But you know what they are trying to, first of all, their global trade is $3.8 trillion. They have become very energy dependent, and 80% or 60 to 80%, I forget the figure, of their energy is coming from the Gulf.
56%.
56%, and from the African coast. All this is going through the Indian Ocean. Their trade flows, exports and imports, are going through the Indian Ocean very largely. So as a country that is deeply engaged in this trade across and energy flows across the Indian Ocean, it's legitimate that they should try and protect their interests or advance their interests as much as possible in terms of developing political relationships, port facilities, access to various littorals. This is legitimate. The problem is, what are Chinese intentions? And will they seek hegemony? Will they behave according to international rules? Will they become more democratic? Then the whole aspect changes. Okay. But otherwise, what the fear is, because China's future policies remain unpredictable, and its current policies are giving rise to a great deal of concern. But let me just add one point. You know, this maritime route that they are, the Silk route that they are developing. Now, what it really means is they want to be able to justify their investments they are making, whether in Myanmar or in Sri Lanka or in Gwadar or elsewhere. And probably they'll throw it in some stage, some temptation to us that they can invest in Indian ports as part of this larger game plan.
Okay, we need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again with this interesting discussion in a bit. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing the Chinese initiative for a new Silk Route, Maritime Silk Route. Master Surie, is the Maritime Silk Route a new name for what was called String of Pearls, China's network of maritime facilities in the Pacific and the Indian Ocean? Now, the String of Pearls concept, which the Chinese themselves never used, it came from an American consultant, had a military connotation. So, is it that they're now rebranding it and calling it a new Maritime Silk Route so that it is not seen as something that creates insecurity in its neighborhood, which actually shows that this is a more cooperative framework, a win-win situation for all if trade goes up?
Well, you know, I think I wouldn't put it that way. As I said to you at the beginning, I think this is part of an overall plan that underscores the entire Chinese modernization and development process. If you are as dependent as they are on the outside world, not only for resources but also for markets, then you will have to look out and search for markets. You will also want connectivity. And this is a search for connectivity. Obviously, this so-called string of pearls approach can gel into it, can fit into it. Whether it is replacing that, I don't know, because I think historically there was a maritime Silk Route, and the revival of this Silk Route can be of benefit to the entire region. It's not that it only holds dangers, that there are no benefits for the other participants. You also have to look at it in the context of China's effort to develop its regions, particularly the outlying regions. See, you have to accept the fact that China is today the second largest or first largest trade player, depending on whether you take total trade or only exports or whatever. You also have to take into account the fact that they are impinging heavily on resource markets. Now, you have to accept the fact that they will want security for their supplies. As Ambassador Sibal said, the problem is there is lack of transparency, at times even opaqueness, in the manner in which they do things. And obviously, this particular point of time, the effort is to try and reach out particularly to ASEAN, with whom they have problems, with some of the member countries with whom they have problems on the islands.
So they reached out to Sri Lanka when GL Perez was there. They reached out to Shiv Shankar Menon when he was there recently.
Well, I think you must understand one thing.
And to GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council.
See, obviously, you will go out in stages. I think the main focus right now is ASEAN. If Sri Lanka, they don't have a problem with. The Sri Lanka-China relationship, if you look at historically, is very close. We tend to ignore that. I mean, if you go back since our independence, Sri Lanka-China relations have been extremely close.
So, you are saying the focus is just on
No, I'm not saying.
ASEAN.
I'm saying the initial focus is on ASEAN. The connectivity to India is through the intended connectivity to India is through BCIM. And Sri Lanka is extremely important because of the Indian Ocean.
Okay. Jabin, even if the maritime Silk Route strategy was purely economic, does it not have strategic implications? And is China beyond using its economic clout to further its strategic goals?
Of course, I mean it's the same question if you were to ask, if China were to turn democratic tomorrow, would we not have problems with China? Of course, we will have problems. It's a structural issue. So, for the Chinese to use their economic clout to achieve larger political objectives or strategic objectives is natural. The question is, to what extent will that turn confrontational or antagonistic? Now, that depends on all sides involved engaging China in such a way that any confrontation will also create costs for them, for the Chinese. And I think the Chinese are aware of it. They are willing at this stage to put themselves out there, give more than they are receiving in order to develop that sort of a cooperative network.
Okay. Ambassador Sibal, China largely relies on civilian and merchant vessels basically to lay claims to various maritime regions. And this blurred distinction between the PLA Navy and the civilian ships, does it also smudge the line between string of pearls, where you have these bases which could potentially be used militarily, and this maritime Silk Route?
2-3 points. One is that China is involved in territorial claims in the South China Sea and is creating a great deal of concern. Now, if you have the concept of a Silk Route, which means very soft and very reassuring and comforting, then they have to first solve the tangles that they're involved in South China Sea and the East China Sea. Without that, it won't have credibility, number one. Number two, what you referred to about China using its commercial ships or non-military vessels to stake their territorial claims. In some senses, one has seen this in the East China Sea, where it's not so much, fishing vessels they use, and they use their paramilitary vessels, Coast Guard and other things, to advance their claims before, but have not brought their naval vessels in. So I don't think that strategy is very clear for the moment. It's just confined to what's happening in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. With regard to the larger picture, I think China, for example, in Gwadar, they are making the deep water port. They are actually dredging the port and increase its depth to 19 meters, as one understands from the press, with the result that the port will be able to accommodate heavy military naval vessels and whatever else. So point is, the berths that they're creating, the length of the berths, the depth of the port and all that will have military implications later on. I think the first step is commercial facilities, and at some future date, yes, they can be converted into some kind of military outposts.
All right. But Surie, quickly, China is a rising regional superpower. And if they want to extend their economic influence and trade influence all the way up to Iran, through the maritime route and all the way to Eastern Europe through the land Silk route. What is the problem? If all the countries of the region also rise with them and benefit economically, what is the big issue?
No, I think the issue is not that others will not benefit. The issue is, will there be a balance of benefits or not? The issue is whether there is transparency in the decision making structures. The issue is whether this extension of Chinese power will be used in a peaceful manner or used to further essentially Chinese strategic interests. So, there are several issues involved. Every new trade route is beneficial to many people, to many countries. But I think the manner in which it is being done, I mean, for instance, we still do not know what this proposal is all about. We know, for instance, what this Maritime Development
But
Fund.
we have said yes to it nonetheless.
I do not think we have said yes.
Well, the reports say India has accepted the invitation.
Well, accepting an invitation to understand what this is all about is one thing, but accepting to be part of this kind of arrangement when we do not even know what the arrangement is, I do not know, because I have seen the briefing which the Foreign Office has put out. There is nothing which suggests that we have accepted this. Okay. But you will. Why should you say no to an invitation like this? I mean, it's you are after all, China is your second or first largest trading partner.
Fair point.
See, we have to stop being paranoid about these things.
Okay.
We have
we are going to discuss this paranoia in the next segment.
Yeah.
We're going to discuss this in the next segment. We need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again with this interesting discussion in a bit. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing the Chinese proposal for a new maritime Silk route. Jabin Jacob, do you think that the idea of a maritime Silk route is unlikely to take off because of the hostility, open or hidden, of countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Philippines and even India?
No, I think the maritime Silk route is pretty much already in place. It's just a new label that the Chinese have affixed. Every new leadership that comes in China has to have some new slogan, some new theme. So, in that sense, the maritime Silk route is pretty much in place. The question is really of hostility. I think that hostility has already played out. This maritime Silk route, this benefit from China has been evident in the region for so many years, but yet none of these smaller countries that you mentioned are willing to give up their territorial dispute or compromise with the Chinese. So, I think in that lies a lesson that the Chinese might have a lot of goodies on offer, but smaller nations are not willing to be bullied. They will stick to their stand, and this is an increasingly interconnected world where one country cannot just unilaterally change the situation on the ground. I think the Chinese are repackaging this, understanding this reality. So, it will move maybe in fits and starts, but it is here to stay.
Okay.
The question is how much will the Chinese compromise or the others compromise?
All right, that remains to be seen, of course. Ambassador Sibal, how do you view the Chinese suggestion of India and China cooperating basically, although Ambassador Surie said we have not accepted to join this initiative, but they have suggested that we cooperate in linking the Pacific Ocean with the Indian Ocean. My question is, how do you see it in the context of the US rebalancing in the Asia Pacific region?
This is also interesting because the Japanese proposed the idea of Indo-Pacific and the Chinese are trying to twist it in a different way and talking about the new maritime Silk route, connecting the Pacific and Indian Oceans. You should see where the Chinese are coming from. Basically, they want to project a peaceful image of China, and it is rebranding, as you earlier said, of this string of pearls, which created suspicions about Chinese intentions because it's more focused on China's long-term military strategy, where the commercial part will be the initial stage, but that concern remains. With regard to the Chinese, our participation in the pivot towards Asia, again, this is intended to put brakes on that and make us, and in fact put us in a difficult situation where we then have to try and see how far we go with the United States and how far we go with China and what is the kind of balancing that we do. So they have posed an important diplomatic challenge to us and make us reassess our calculations about what we should do in terms of balancing between the two.
Ambassador Surie, how do you see it?
Well, I think it's a question of are we nimble enough to take advantage of both these proposals?
Yes.
And I think that is the challenge to Indian diplomacy and to Indian security
But
policy.
are we?
I think we are. I think the very fact that the Chinese have approached you at this stage, that 6 months after the original proposal was made or 4 months after, is because you have made moves which are beginning to have a certain amount of certain alarm bells in Beijing.
What are these moves?
Well, I think the fact that your relations with Japan are now moving much closer, the fact that ASEAN is now beginning to look upon you as a possible alternative. I think various other steps that you are taking, your own stronger position, and as your economy goes stronger, which it will irrespective of what happens, I think you will find that the Chinese will take you more and more seriously. But the question is, do you take yourself seriously enough?
Okay, Jabin, what's your take quickly, because then I move on to something else.
I think, see, you have to remember that the Chinese have designed a corridor that is almost exclusively for India, the BCIM economic corridor. So that again, to buttress what Ambassador Surie was saying, shows that the Chinese are paying attention to what we are doing, and they don't pay attention to what we are doing unless we've been doing something significant. I'll leave you with that.
So if you are doing something significant, why be paranoid about China?
I think
I mean, we actually are probably going to have a naval exercise with them after the defense ministries meet soon. Both countries are talking about Afghanistan, we are talking about Africa, China is a very important trading partner. So do you think this India-China conflict is really a figment of the imagination of the media?
No, no, it's real.
It's real.
It's real because which are the two countries in the world which claim Indian territory? It's China and Pakistan. Both collaborate with each other. China has made Pakistan into a nuclear and missile power. These are hard facts. And from this flow, all the suspicions and the paranoia that you are speaking about, plus, of course, the widening gap between China and India, both militarily and economically, and in terms of global prestige. China is in a much stronger position. So once the border issue gets resolved, genuinely, then I think the whole optic will change. And then India has no reason to fear China because there are no territorial claims. Difference may still be, but differences would be in terms of managing our respective interests, but no strategic threat in that sense. But until that is done, I think you might call it paranoia. I think it's a realistic assessment of the challenges that Chinese power will pose to us. Hence, our concentration on developing our strategic capabilities, especially naval.
Ambassador Surie, despite all the differences, our trade links are growing. Chinese goods are coming in the Indian market. They are, not always cheap quality, bad quality goods. Our trade relationships are thriving. We are, despite the claims on our territory, despite their cooperation with Pakistan, things are moving on an even keel by and large. Except these some border skirmishes once in a while. So do you buy the analysis that Ambassador Sibal has put forward?
There is no contradiction between what I have been saying and what Ambassador Sibal is saying. Firstly, we have had no border skirmishes. Let us be very clear on that. Okay. There has been no skirmish on the border since 1967 or whenever. So we should be very clear on that. See, I don't think you can worry too much about developing the economic package up to a point. But as long as the border overhang remains, I think there will be finite limits to the cooperation in virtually every field of endeavor.
But do you see that getting resolved quickly? That may take another 10 years, 15 years.
Yes, but at the same time, don't forget, if we keep growing as an economy as we have, and if our plans fall into place, including our national manufacturing policy, if you look at the next 10-year horizon, the share of China and India's overall trade will not go up much more. If you look at the percentages, the way they are projected by the current government, it will remain around 10% of India's trade. So while your overall trade will be much larger, China's share in that will not go up much larger. Okay. Now, even this latest suggestion that China invest in India's infrastructure, I think we must understand what the word invest means. Mostly the Chinese do projects in India, which means your trade imbalance will get even more worse, will get worse. So let us not confuse investment with projects, which is a problem we have had with China. There is a lot of Chinese projects in India, that is not Chinese investment in India. We are buying capital equipment and it is being erected in India.
Okay. Jabin, your take on it? Are we paranoid about China?
I wouldn't say that we are. I mean, we have to look at which. I don't think the government is necessarily paranoid. Maybe the ordinary Indian on the street is also not paranoid. But there is a section that pays too close attention to strategic issues.
Which is this section? Name it.
I mean, the ones, people like us who are focused on China's growth, China's political and military strategy. I mean, again, paranoia might be a bit of an overstatement. I think we are perhaps extremely cautious. There is no reason for paranoia. And let me suggest that more than a boundary or a territorial dispute with China, there is a larger strategic issue that China puts before us. And that is the question of the battle of ideas. In a state where today we perceive a decline in the West and this so-called Beijing consensus or Chinese model, what's the model that India can come up with? I think this is the true challenge before intellectuals, before the strategic community, before the government for the future.
Sibal, last word to you. Do you agree with this? It's a battle of ideas?
Not really. I think that so far the Chinese have nothing to offer. Maybe some African dictatorships derive some inspiration.
Don't point at him. He's not defending African dictatorships.
This is inspiration from the Chinese model. But Chinese model itself is being very seriously questioned from within, and it just cannot survive. You can't have an open market style of economy and a closed political system.
Okay,
This has
Ambassador
to
Surie.
change.
I only want to reiterate what I think I've said earlier. And when in dealing with China, you have to first verify and then trust, and not the other way around.
Okay. All right. You agree?
Yes.
You also agree on this? Good. So for once we have an agreement on this program. Thank you very much for coming here and analyzing this new proposal for our viewers. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week with another interesting issue. Till then, goodbye and thanks for watching.